Imagine waking up to the sound of piercing bells, a sound that cuts through the pre-dawn darkness. Cold, so biting it seeps into your very bones. Not a gentle awakening. No, this is a summons. You're 7 years old, a child ripped from warmth and comfort, now shivering in the oppressive chill of a stone dormitory. Your breath a fleeting cloud of defiance, small hands fumbling with coarse wool, the rough habit a constant reminder of your captivity. 20 other girls stir around you, their faces etched with a pallor that mirrors the meager candlelight. Silent, spectral figures in this pre-dawn ritual. One girl, barely 5, wrestles with her oversized robes, her tiny frame swallowed by the drab fabric. An instinct flares, the urge to offer comfort, a whispered word of reassurance. But the memory of Margaret, her punishment for such kindness only a week ago, slams down with brutal force. 3 days. 3 days without food, kneeling on unforgiving dried peas, the sharp edges biting into her knees until blood stained her stockings. A vivid tableau of suffering. This isn't a school, not a sanctuary, far from it. This is Whitby Abbey, perched precariously on the windswept cliffs of Yorkshire, England, the year 1247. And you are trapped, not by choice, but by the cold, calculating machinations of your father, a pawn in his game of political alliances with the church. 6 months ago, the heavy oak doors of this abbey slammed shut, effectively sealing away your childhood. You remember the frantic goodbyes, your mother's tear-streaked face fading as the massive doors groaned closed. A life of fields and laughter, of honey cakes and a warm hearth surrounded by family, a memory now of phantom touch, forever out of reach. In its place, a relentless cycle of survival, a brutal education in obedience, where hunger is elevated to holiness, and silence, absolute, unwavering silence, becomes your only confidant, your only shield against the Abbey's cold brutality. The first bell, its harsh clang fracturing the darkness, signals the start of another agonizing day. Not a daybreak filled with warmth and hope, but a stark reminder of relentless obligations. Imagine the scene. Young girls, some as young as 5, barely awake, their bodies stiff and aching from sleeping on the unyielding stone floors, stumble from their straw pallets, in rooms where breath crystallizes in the air, where rats scurry fearlessly between the cold flagstones. At Shaftesbury Abbey in Dorset, a place founded centuries before, in 888, the dormitory housed girls from noble families, families who discarded them as unwanted baggage, political pawns to be bartered and traded. Lady Godiva of Mercia herself sent her youngest daughter, Edith, to this very fate in 1043 AD. A girl barely 4 years old, sacrificed at the altar of political expediency. Daughters, sadly, were often considered expendable currency in the ruthless game of medieval power. Edith's story, a poignant fragment preserved within the Abbey's chronicles, penned by the abbess Elfgifu in meticulous Latin script. Parvula Edith, she wrote, weeps without cease for 3 days and nights. Her tears freeze upon her cheeks in the morning cold. She calls for her mother, in the Saxon tongue, a language we do not speak here. She must learn that her mother is dead to her now, that God alone is her father. Picture these children, adrift in a sea of unfamiliarity, struggling through their first weeks, stripped bare of every vestige of their former lives. Their hair, once carefully braided by loving hands, now crudely shorn, an act designed to eradicate vanity. Soft silk gowns replaced with scratchy woolen habits, the coarse fabric chafing against delicate skin unaccustomed to such discomfort. Delicate hands, once protected by fine gloves, now cracked and bleeding from the relentless cold and the ceaseless grueling labor. Lady Matilda Fitzwalter, a girl sent to Godstow Abbey near Oxford in 1185 AD at the tender age of 6, would later write, years later, in a clandestine letter smuggled to her sister, a poignant reflection on her stolen childhood. "I remember," she confessed, "the taste of marchpane, the feel of ermine against my cheek. Now, I know only the taste of barley gruel, the abrasive feel of rough hemp against my skin. Sometimes, I wonder if those early memories are mere dreams, for this stone world feels too real, too enduring to have been preceded by any other life. Silence in these places wasn't golden. It was survival, the shield against inevitable punishment. From the moment of morning prayers until the final bell at night, speaking was strictly forbidden unless expressly permitted for lessons or confession. The girls learned to communicate through a language of subtle gestures, a fleeting glance, a delicate positioning of hands during prayer, the careful placement of their bodies in the refectory, a silent lexicon born of necessity. A tilted head might signal hunger. A particular way of holding the prayer book could indicate illness. A specific posture during Mass might betray the silent struggle with despair. At Barking Abbey in Essex, notorious for its severe discipline, the oppressive silence was broken only by the chilling sound of leather striking flesh. The discipline chamber, a small, stark stone room where girls were dragged for infractions as minor as smiling during prayers or moving too slowly during processions. Sister Maynard, who served as the disciplinarian from 1203 to 1219 AD, kept meticulous records of punishments, a chilling testament to her cruelty chronicled in her Liber Corrections. Her entries read like a catalog of calculated torment. Alicia, age 7, struck 5 times with the rod for laughing during none. Margaret, age 9, 15 strokes for speaking during the reading of scripture. Beatrice, age 5, held by the arms while struck 10 times for wetting her bedding. These weren't isolated incidents. These were the daily realities, a constant state of fear, of making mistakes they didn't understand, of transgressions they didn't realize were transgressions. Even Eleanor of Aquitaine's youngest daughter, Joanna, was placed in Fontevraud Abbey in France in 1176 AD, at the age of 11. Her letters to her mother, discovered in the Abbey's archives in the 19th century, reveal a child slowly crumbling under the relentless weight of constant surveillance and merciless punishment. "Dearest mother," she wrote, her words echoing across the centuries, "I have learned to move like a shadow, to breathe like a whisper. Yesterday, I was beaten for allowing my thoughts to wander during matins. How do they know what I think? I fear they can see inside my mind. I fear they can see my dreams of home." Food wasn't nourishment. It was both a weapon and a method of control. The children ate once a day, sometimes if they were fortunate. The fare was predictably meager: gruel, black bread, and water. Meat was strictly forbidden, except on the highest feast days, and even then, it was dispensed sparingly. At Wilton Abbey in Wiltshire, breakfast consisted of a small, dry piece of bread and a cup of water. Dinner, little more than barley porridge with perhaps a few meager vegetables grown in the Abbey garden. Children who arrived plump and rosy-cheeked from their privileged homes quickly became gaunt, their cheeks hollowed, their eyes impossibly large for their emaciated faces. But the constant hunger, it was deliberate. It was considered a spiritual discipline, a way to subdue the body, to force it into submission to God's will. What the abbesses conveniently failed to acknowledge was the simple truth: hungry children cannot focus on prayers, cannot learn effectively. They become consumed by thoughts of food, hoarding crusts of bread in their clothing, dreaming of elaborate feasts instead of salvation. Agnes of Bohemia, daughter of King Ottokar I, was sent to the Poor Clares convent in Prague in 1234 AD at the age of 8. Her confessor, Brother Francis, wrote to her father a desperate plea for intervention. "Your daughter," he confessed, "speaks of nothing but food. She counts the hours between meals. She weeps not for your absence, but for the memory of roasted fowl and honeyed wine. This is not devotion, Your Majesty. This is desperation." Winter, in these stone fortresses, was a season of unspeakable brutality. Heating was minimal, limited to small fires in the chapter house and perhaps the scriptorium, spaces the children rarely frequented. Dormitories remained unheated, even when snow piled high against the narrow windows, when ice formed on the meager water basins. Imagine the bone-chilling cold that seeped into every corner of the room, a constant, pervasive presence. Children slept in shared beds, huddled together for meager warmth, often 3 or 4 to a narrow, lumpy straw mattress. At Newminster Abbey, built in Winchester in 902 AD, the dormitory, a long, narrow hall with no windows, offered little respite from the elements. Only one small fireplace sputtered weakly at the far end, offering little discernible heat. Girls slept fully clothed, wearing every scrap of clothing they possessed, yet still woke with frostbite stinging their fingers and toes. Lady Isabel de Clare, sent to Amesbury Abbey in Wiltshire in 1248 AD, at the tender age of 6, wrote in her adult memoir a harrowing glimpse into the icy dormitories. "I remember," she recalled, "the sound of teeth chattering in the darkness, like castanets played by invisible hands. I remember the girl next to me, Marie, barely 5, newly arrived from Normandy, a land she still spoke of with longing, her words foreign and incomprehensible. She spoke no English. She wept every night for her nurse, her cries muffled by the thin blankets. One morning in February, she simply wouldn't wake. Her lips were blue as violets. They carried her away while we recited morning prayers, and we never spoke of her again. It was as if she had never existed. Death, in these places, was commonplace and unremarkable, a constant companion. Children died from the cold, from illness, from relentless malnutrition, from the slow, insidious creep of despair. Abbey records paint a stark picture. Infant mortality rates hovering near 30% for girls under 10. These deaths, recorded matter-of-factly, devoid of emotion, devoid of investigation. At Shaftesbury Abbey, the death roll for the year 1209 AD lists with chilling brevity: Johanna, age 5, died of fever on the feast of St. Michael. Margaret, age 7, died of wasting sickness on the feast of St. Luke. Beatrice, age 6, died of consumption on the feast of St. Martin. No surnames, no family notifications, no elaborate burials, no displays of grief or mourning. They were buried in unmarked graves in the convent cemetery, their lives reduced to brief, impersonal entries in account books. Education, when it existed at all, was a severely limited affair, focused on basic literacy in Latin and the rote memorization of prayers. Most children learned to read only enough to follow along in their prayer books, a skill sufficient only to perpetuate their captivity. Writing was taught to a select few, usually those destined for administrative positions within the convent, scribes and record keepers. Mathematics, virtually non-existent, deemed unnecessary and potentially dangerous. History was limited to biblical stories and the sanitized lives of saints, a curated narrative designed to instill obedience and suppress independent thought. Science, deemed inherently dangerous, the pursuit of knowledge viewed with suspicion, as it might lead to questioning God's mysteries, a transgression punishable by harsh penance. At Laycock Abbey in Wiltshire, founded in 1229 AD, the curriculum consisted of memorizing the Psalms, learning to embroider ecclesiastical vestments, and studying the lives of female saints. Lady Ella of Salisbury, who founded the abbey, enshrined her educational philosophy in her charter. Let the young maids learn submission through scripture, patience through needlework, and humility through the study of those holy women who suffered for Christ. There was no mention of arithmetic, no study of medicine or healing, no exploration of literature beyond narrowly defined religious texts. These children, quite deliberately, were being trained not to think, but to obey, to blindly accept the dictates of the church. Physical punishment, far from being viewed as abuse, was actively encouraged, considered a necessary tool for spiritual development. The rod, the strap, the discipline of fasting, these were presented as instruments of salvation. Children who showed any signs of independence or creativity were beaten until they conformed, until their spirits were broken. At Dartford Priory in Kent, founded in 1355 AD, the rule bluntly stated, "Spare not the rod, for it is through suffering that the young soul learns to love God above all earthly things." The abbess, Dame Joan Vaux, was notorious throughout England for her particularly harsh methods. She kept a collection of willow switches in her chamber, each neatly labeled with the names of the girls in her care. Parents who visited their daughters often noticed the welts on their arms and backs, the lingering marks of the abbess's discipline, but they said nothing, accepting it as their due. To question the abbess, after all, was tantamount to questioning God himself. Sister Margaret of Hanossa, who served as novice mistress at Poissy Abbey in France from 1298 to 1215 AD, chronicled her methods in her private journal, a chilling glimpse into the mindset of a religious zealot. "Today," she wrote, "I struck young Blanche 20 times for questioning why God allows suffering. She is 8 years old and asked why her baby brother died if God loves children. Such questions are dangerous. They lead to doubt, and doubt is the enemy of faith. Better she learns through pain than through reason, for reason leads to perdition." Sleep, already a precious commodity, was interrupted regularly for night prayers. Children were dragged from their beds at midnight for matins, again at 3 a.m. for lauds, and again at dawn for prime. The cycle of sleep deprivation a constant torment. Their developing bodies, already weakened by poor nutrition and the relentless cold, were further stressed by chronic lack of rest. At Godstow Abbey, where Rosamond Clifford, mistress of Henry II, was buried in 1176 AD, the night bells rang so frequently that the children developed a strange, unsettling walking sleep. They would rise, their eyes open but unseeing, their voices joining in the unison chants they had memorized through sheer repetition, their minds utterly divorced from the meaning of the words. Lady Alice Fitzhugh, who spent 12 years at Godstow, beginning in 1289 AD, wrote to her niece, her words laced with a chilling resignation. "I learned to pray in my sleep, to genuflect while dreaming, to sing psalms while my mind wandered through faded memories of sunlight and laughter. We were like clockwork dolls, wound up each morning and set in motion by the bells. I feared that if the bells ever stopped, I would collapse entirely, for I had forgotten how to move without their command." Emotional bonds, deliberately, actively, discouraged. Children were taught that love for family was idolatry, that affection between friends was sinful, that any attachment to earthly things was an obstacle to salvation. At Elstow Abbey in Bedfordshire, a place where John Bunyan would later find inspiration for Pilgrim's Progress, girls were strictly forbidden from forming particular friendships. They were moved regularly between dormitories, a calculated tactic to prevent emotional attachments from taking root. Letters from home were read aloud to the entire community, a cruel act designed to prevent any private comfort or solace. Gifts from families were confiscated and distributed equally among all the children, further eroding any sense of individual care or special love. Dame Clemence of Barking, who ruled Barking Abbey from 1173 to 1186 AD, instituted a policy of spiritual detachment that forbade girls from speaking of their families or their lives before entering the convent. "The past is dead," she proclaimed, her words chillingly absolute. "Only the present service to God matters. Those who dwell on earthly affections will find no peace in prayer." Children who dared to mention their parents or siblings were punished with solitary confinement in stark stone cells, where they were fed only bread and water until they agreed to renounce their worldly attachments. Young Lady Eleanor de Browis, sent to a canon lay priory in Herefordshire in 1235 AD, at the age of 7, chronicled her despair in her secret diary, a forbidden act of rebellion. "I try to remember my mother's face," she confessed, her words a poignant testament to her fading memories. "But it grows dimmer each day. Sister Agatha says this is good, that I am learning to love God more than earthly things. But I do not feel love for God. I feel only emptiness, as if something precious has been carved out of my chest with a dull knife. I pretend to be holy, but inside I am becoming hollow." Physical abuse extended far beyond the realm of formal punishment. Children were regularly struck for minor infractions, pinched for inattentiveness, and slapped for simply showing emotion. At Romsey Abbey in Hampshire, where the future Saint Christina of Markyate sought refuge in 1114 AD, The daily routine included what was euphemistically called correction, a system of physical intimidation designed to enforce absolute compliance. Children learned to flinch at sudden movements, to keep their eyes downcast, to speak only when spoken to, a culture of fear meticulously cultivated. The scriptorium at Shaftesbury Abbey, a repository of knowledge and art, ironically contains a manuscript illuminated by a young girl named Adelheid in 1267 AD, her art a silent scream against the injustice she endured. In the margins, barely visible, she drew tiny figures of children with tears streaming down their faces, a secret language of suffering. These marginalia, discovered only in 1923 when the manuscript was being restored, are believed by art historians to be coded messages, a way of expressing pain and fear that could not be spoken aloud. The figures, crude but emotionally powerful, depict stick children with enormous eyes, their hands pressed to their mouths, their bodies bent as if in perpetual fear. Sexual abuse, while never officially acknowledged, simmers beneath the surface of the historical record, glimpsed in confession records and private letters, a hidden stain on the supposed sanctity of these institutions. At Wherwell Abbey in Hampshire, founded in 986 AD, Father Edmund, the confessor, wrote to his bishop in 1278 AD, his words heavy with concern and unease. "I am troubled," Father Edmund confessed, his words a plea for guidance, "by what I hear in the confessional. Young girls speak of inappropriate touching by elder nuns, of being made to lie with sisters for warmth in ways that disturb their innocence. I know not how to counsel them, for they fear punishment if they resist, yet their souls are surely being damaged by these practices." Dame Agnes of Huntington, who served as abbess at Stixwood Abbey from 1257 to 1281 AD, was investigated by church authorities following accusations from several noble families, a testament to the pervasive nature of the problem. Letters between Bishop Hugh of Lincoln and the Archbishop of Canterbury describe unseemly conduct with the younger maids and practices that corrupt the innocent. The investigation, however, was quietly dropped when Dame Agnes provided substantial financial gifts to the church, a blatant act of bribery, and the accusers were threatened with excommunication if they continued their complaints, silencing their voices and protecting the institution at the expense of the children. Lady Isabel de Fortibus, daughter of the Earl of Devon, was removed from Canonsley Abbey in Devon in 1284 AD after she sent a coded message to her father, a desperate act of survival, describing evil touches in the darkness, a euphemism for unspeakable acts. Her father, William de Fortibus, wrote to King Edward I, his voice trembling with righteous anger and paternal concern. "My daughter," he declared, "speaks of things that cannot be named, of sisters who come to her bed in the night and do unholy things. When I demanded answers from the abbess, she claimed my daughter was mad with religious fervor, dismissing her accusations as the ramblings of a disturbed mind. But I have seen the marks on her body, the fear in her eyes. I will not leave her in that place of corruption." Medical care in these institutions was primitive and often dangerous. Children who fell ill were routinely treated with bloodletting, purging, and prayer, a misguided attempt to restore balance to their humors. At Wilton Abbey, the infirmary was a small, stark stone room with no windows and minimal heating, a place of isolation and despair. Sick children were isolated from the community and left to recover, or more often, die, with minimal intervention. The Abbey chronicler, Sister Matilda, wrote in 1245, a chillingly detached observation. "Little Constance suffers from a fever that burns her flesh and makes her speak in strange tongues. We have bled her thrice and given her bitter herbs, but she grows weaker. The abbess says it is God's will, that perhaps her suffering will prick his brace for us all." Herbal medicine, indeed, was practiced by some of the elder nuns, but it was often mixed with superstition and religious ritual, a blend of folk remedies and misguided beliefs. At Amesbury Abbey, Sister Beatrice, the herbalist, kept detailed records of treatments, a mix of practical knowledge and baseless superstition. For fever in children, she wrote, mix wormwood with holy water and blessed salt. If the child continues to burn, apply leeches to the temples while reciting 50 Ave Marias. Should the fever break, give thanks to St. Dunstan. Should the child die, give thanks to God for calling another innocent soul to heaven. A disturbing acceptance of preventable death. The psychological impact of this isolation and abuse was profound and far-reaching. Children who survived to adulthood often displayed what we would now recognize as classic trauma responses. They had immense difficulty forming relationships, their trust shattered by betrayal and cruelty. They experienced frequent nightmares and debilitating anxiety, and they struggled with pervasive depression, a heavy weight on their souls. Lady Margaret Boet, who spent 3 years at Maxstoke Priory in Worcestershire from 1439 to 1442 AD, wrote in her private devotional book, A Glimpse into Her Tormented Inner World. I am 30 years old, she confessed, and still I wake in terror when church bells ring. I still count the hours between meals. I still find myself moving silently through my own home as if noise might bring punishment. The child I was in that place is dead, but her ghost haunts every moment of my life. Some children, driven to desperation, attempted escape. Though few succeeded, their attempts met with swift and brutal retribution. At Godstow Abbey, a girl named Mabel of Gloucester attempted to flee in 1278 AD by hiding in a cart carrying supplies to Oxford, a daring but ultimately futile plan. She was caught and brought back, where she was imprisoned in the Abbey's underground punishment cell for 3 months, a horrifying ordeal. The cell, barely large enough for a child to lie down, offered no light and minimal food, a place designed to break the spirit. When she was finally released, other children reported that she had lost the ability to speak coherently and would rock back and forth while humming tunelessly, a shattered remnant of her former self. Dame Alice of Normandy, who served as abbess at Malling Abbey in Kent from 1289 to 1305 AD, kept a detailed record of escape attempts, her words laced with disdain and a chilling lack of empathy. Her journal records, young Marie attempted to scale the walls during matins. She fell and broke her arm, which I take as God's punishment for her defiance. Catherine tried to hide in the hay wagons bound for Canterbury. She was discovered and brought back for proper correction. Isabel feigned illness to avoid morning prayers, hoping to be taken to the infirmary and then to escape. All these attempts, she concluded, reveal the same evil, the unwillingness to submit to God's plan for their lives, a warped justification for their suffering. The most heartbreaking aspect of these records is how systematically these children were broken. They arrived as individuals with distinct personalities, unique preferences, and cherished dreams. They were transformed into hollow vessels for religious devotion, their spirits crushed under the crushing weight of absolute obedience. At Barking Abbey, the chronicler, Sister Euphemia, wrote with what seems like chilling satisfaction, a celebration of extinguished individuality. Young Lady Philippa arrived last spring full of worldly pride and stubborn will. She spoke often of her silk gowns and her pet falcon. Today, she knelt before me and begged forgiveness for her former vanity. She has requested that her beautiful hair be cut even shorter, that her meals be reduced further, that she be given additional penances. God has conquered her rebellious heart. This was not education. It was the systematic destruction of personality and individuality, a deliberate act of spiritual violence. Children learned that their thoughts were dangerous, their emotions sinful, their bodies shameful. They were taught to fear their own minds, to distrust their own feelings, to submit completely to authority without question, a complete abdication of self. At Romsey Abbey, the novice mistress, Dame Scholastica, wrote detailed instructions for training young girls, a chillingly clinical guide to spiritual subjugation. The child, she wrote, must be taught that her will is corrupt, that her desires are evil, that her only hope lies in complete surrender to God's representatives on earth. She must learn to hate what she once loved, to fear what once brought her joy, to find peace only in absolute submission. The irony is that many of these children were from wealthy, powerful families who could have provided them with excellent educations, comfortable lives, and meaningful futures. Instead, they were sacrificed to political expediency, religious fanaticism, and the deeply flawed belief that suffering was somehow purifying, a perversion of faith. Lady Eleanor de Montfort, daughter of Simon de Montfort, was sent to Amesbury Abbey in 1265 AD at the age of 8 following her father's death in battle, a life irrevocably altered. She wrote to her mother, her words filled with poignant longing. "I had everything a child could want: books, music, fine clothes, loving servants. Now I have nothing but cold stones and endless prayers. They tell me I am blessed, that I am closer to God than those who live in the world. But I feel farther from heaven than ever. For how can a God of love create such misery for his smallest children?" Some children, however, found ways to preserve their sanity through small acts of rebellion, clinging to their humanity in the face of overwhelming oppression. At Shaftesbury Abbey, archaeological excavations in the 1960s uncovered a cache of small objects hidden in the wall of the dormitory, a testament to their enduring spirit. A wooden doll, a piece of colored glass, a pressed flower, a letter written in a childish hand. These were treasures hidden by children who refused to let their humanity be completely extinguished. The letter, written in Norman French, reads, "My name is Eleanor. I am 7 years old. I have been here for 2 years. I remember my mother's voice when she sang to me. I remember my father's beard against my cheek. I remember my dog, Rousseau, who would sleep at the foot of my dead. I write this so that someone will know I was here, that I was real, that I was loved." The long-term effects on these children were devastating, a legacy of trauma that haunted them for the rest of their lives. Many died young from illness, malnutrition, or despair, their bodies and spirits broken beyond repair. Those who survived to adulthood often struggled with mental illness, an inability to form meaningful relationships, and a deep-seated fear of authority, forever scarred by their experiences. Some became abbesses themselves, perpetuating the cycle of abuse they had endured, trapped in a system that offered no escape. Others, when they finally escaped or were released, found themselves unable to function in the normal world, forever outsiders. Lady Matilda of Gloucester, who spent 8 years at Wilton Abbey beginning in 1245 AD, was finally retrieved by her family when she was 16, a reunion that was both joyous and heartbreaking. Her brother, Earl Gilbert, wrote to his mother, his words filled with grief and disbelief. "Matilda is so changed I barely recognize her. She speaks only in whispers, starts at sudden sounds, and will not eat unless given explicit permission. When I embraced her, she flinched as if I meant to strike her. Whatever they did to her in that place, they have killed the girl I once knew and replaced her with a frightened ghost." The economic dimensions of these arrangements cannot be ignored. The exchange of innocence for gold, a dark undercurrent beneath the veneer of piety. Wealthy families paid substantial dowries to place their daughters in convents, often exceeding what they would have paid for marriage arrangements. A calculated transaction. The convents, in turn, became wealthy institutions, accumulating land, gold, and political influence through these transactions, their coffers swelling with the price of stolen childhoods. At Shaftesbury Abbey, the account books reveal a disturbing reality. In 1267 AD, the abbey collected over 2,000 marks in dowries for accepting noble daughters, an enormous sum equivalent to millions of dollars today. Dame Juliana of Norwich, who served as abbess at Carrow Abbey from 1342 to 1359 AD, wrote frankly about the economic incentives, her words tinged with cynicism. "The noble families pay handsomely to be rid of their surplus daughters," she confessed, her honesty a rare glimpse behind the abbey walls. "We provide them with a holy justification for what is essentially abandonment. The children suffer, but the coffers are full, and the church grows stronger. I sometimes wonder if God approves of this exchange of innocence for gold." The most tragic aspect of these arrangements was how completely the children were forgotten by their families, banished from memory as if they had ceased to exist. Once a child was placed in a convent, she essentially vanished from the family narrative. Inheritance laws were written as if she had died. Marriage alliances were made without her existence. Family histories often omitted any mention of daughters who had been given to the church, erased from the record.
Lady Agnes de Aleski, who was sent to Arden Priory in Yorkshire in 1308 at the age of 5, wrote 20 years later, her words filled with a profound sense of abandonment. "I have received no word from my family since the day I entered this place," she lamented, her voice echoing across the centuries.
"I do not know if my parents live or have died. I do not know if my brothers have married or had children. I am a ghost to them, and they are ghosts to me. Sometimes I wonder if my family was real, or if I dreamed them in another life." The psychological techniques used to break these children were sophisticated and systematic, a carefully crafted campaign of control. They were isolated from everything familiar, subjected to constant surveillance, punished for expressing emotion, and rewarded only for complete submission, their spirits slowly eroded. At Nun Appleton Priory in Yorkshire, the rules stated, a chillingly clinical assessment of the ideal novice: the young maid must be watched always, for in solitude she may remember her former life and grow sorrowful. When she weeps, she must be corrected. When she smiles, she must be questioned. When she speaks of home, she must be punished. Only when she shows neither joy nor sorrow, but perfect indifference to all earthly things, has she achieved the proper state of grace. Modern psychologists would recognize these techniques as systematic psychological abuse, designed to create learned helplessness and complete dependency, breaking their will and erasing their sense of self. The children were taught that they were powerless, that resistance was futile, that their only hope lay in absolute obedience to their captors, trapping them in a cycle of fear and submission. At Barking Abbey, the novice mistress, Dame Euphemia, wrote, her words a chillingly concise summary of the desired outcome. "A properly trained child should move like a shadow, speak like an echo, and think like a prayer book. She should have no desires of her own, no opinions of her own, no dreams of her own. She should be an empty vessel, ready to be filled with God's will as interpreted by her superiors." The rare accounts of children who maintained their spirit despite years of abuse are particularly poignant, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Lady Margaret de Clare, who spent 6 years at Amesbury Abbey beginning in 1282 AD, secretly kept a journal written in a coded script she developed, a dangerous act of defiance. Her entries reveal a child determined to preserve her identity despite overwhelming pressure to conform, clinging to the remnants of her former self. "They have taken my name and call me Sister Scholastica," she wrote, her words a quiet act of rebellion. "They have taken my hair and covered my head with rough cloth. They have taken my voice and demand silence, but they cannot take my thoughts, though they try. In my mind, I am still Margaret. I still love the feel of silk and the taste of honey. I still remember my mother's laughter and my father's stories. They may own my body, but my soul remains my own." The complicity of families in these arrangements is perhaps the most difficult aspect to comprehend, a betrayal cloaked in piety. Parents who claimed to love their children willingly sent them to places where they knew they would suffer, their actions a testament to the power of societal pressure and religious dogma. The letters between parents and abbesses reveal a shocking callousness toward children's welfare, a disturbing acceptance of their fate. Lord Hugh de Mortimer wrote to the abbess of Achonbury Priory in 1278 AD, his words a chilling endorsement of cruelty. "I send my daughter Isabel to your care. She is willful and prone to laughter, faults which I trust you will correct with appropriate discipline. Do not spare the rod, for I would rather have a godly daughter than a happy one." Lady Joan de Genneville wrote to her daughter at Amesbury Abbey in 1290 AD, her words a hollow echo of religious platitudes. "I am pleased to hear that you have learned submission and no longer weak for your former life. Your suffering now will purchase ease in the world to come. Remember that earthly happiness is fleeting, but heavenly reward is eternal. Bear your trials with patience and know that I am proud of your sacrifice." These letters reveal parents who had convinced themselves that they were acting in their children's best interests, that suffering was somehow beneficial, that breaking a child's spirit was a form of love, a twisted logic that justified their cruelty.
The psychological mechanisms they use to justify their actions are eerily similar to those used by abusers throughout history. The claim that pain is necessary, that it builds character, that it serves a higher purpose, a dangerous and destructive ideology. The medical consequences of the harsh conditions were severe and well documented. At Wilton Abbey, the death records show that nearly half of all children admitted died before reaching adulthood, a horrifying statistic. The causes were varied but predictable: malnutrition, disease, exposure, and what the chroniclers euphemistically called failure to thrive, a euphemism for despair. Modern physicians would recognize these deaths as resulting from systematic neglect and abuse, a consequence of their brutal environment. Sister Margaret the Infirmarian at Shaftesbury Abbey wrote in 1289 AD, her words tinged with a growing unease. Young Beatrice grows thinner each day, despite our efforts to feed her. She cannot retain food, and speaks constantly of her mother. I fear her body fails because her spirit is broken. The abbess says, "This is God's will." But I have seen many children sicken and die in the same manner. Their bodies seem to give up when their hearts are destroyed. The psychological concept of failure to thrive was unknown in medieval times, but the symptoms were clearly observed, a devastating consequence of their suffering. Children who could not adapt to the harsh conditions would gradually waste away, losing weight, becoming listless, and eventually dying without any obvious physical cause, their spirits extinguished. Modern understanding of trauma would recognize these deaths as the result of severe psychological stress manifesting in physical symptoms, a final act of defiance by a broken body. The dissolution of the monasteries under Henry VIII in the 1530s finally freed many of these children, but freedom came too late for most, their lives irrevocably damaged. Women who had spent their entire lives in convents found themselves unable to function in the outside world, lost and adrift. They had no practical skills, no understanding of secular life, no ability to form normal relationships, forever marked by their experiences. Many became beggars, eking out a meager existence on the streets. Others retreated into hermitages, seeking solace in isolation, and some went mad from the shock of sudden liberty, their minds unable to cope with the world. Lady Margaret Pole, who had been imprisoned at Sion Abbey as a child, wrote after the dissolution, her words a poignant reflection on her lost childhood. "They have opened the cage, but the bird has forgotten how to fly," she confessed, her spirit crushed. "I stand in sunlight and feel only fear. I hear laughter and do not understand its meaning. I am free, but I am not alive. They killed the child I was so thoroughly that no woman could grow from her remains." The stories of these children remind us that institutional abuse is not a modern invention. The systematic destruction of childhood in the name of a higher purpose has ancient roots, and the justifications used by medieval abbesses echo through the centuries in the words of every authority figure who has ever claimed that cruelty serves a noble end. Remember these children who slept on cold stone floors, who wept silent tears into straw pillows, who dreamed of mothers' faces they were forbidden to remember. Remember them. These were not distant figures from a barbaric past. They were children like any children, with the same needs for love, comfort, and kindness that children have always had.
Their voices were silenced, their names forgotten, their suffering dismissed as holy sacrifice. But in the margins of manuscripts, in the cracks between stones, in the whispered confessions of dying nuns, their stories survive, a testament to their resilience and a warning to us all. They remind us that the price of unquestioned authority is always paid by the most vulnerable, and that no cause, however sacred, justifies the destruction of a child's soul. The bells that once called them to prayer have long since fallen silent. The stone walls that imprisoned them have crumbled. The abbesses who tormented them have returned to dust. But the echo of their suffering remains, a haunting reminder of the past. A warning from the past that childhood is sacred, that innocence deserves protection, and that any system that systematically destroys the young in the name of salvation is itself damned, forever tainted by its cruelty. The next time you hear bells ringing, remember those who had no choice, no voice, no escape from the stone fortresses that promised heaven but delivered only hell. Remember them. Remember their names when you can find them. Remember their pain when records preserve it. Remember their courage when it flickered briefly before being extinguished. Remember that they were children first, victims second, and statistics never. In remembering, we honor not just their suffering, but their humanity. And in honoring their humanity, we guard against the return of systems that would sacrifice children on the altar of any cause, however noble it claims to be.